wonderful paper, which got us off to just the right start, I think. It's precisely these sorts of things that I myself was desperate to hear about, and it's wonderful to have such a clear example of very strong and direct Egyptian cultural influence on Greek technical literature in particular. That's something which I find really fascinating. For our next talk, I'd like to introduce Alessandra Rochetti. She's a PhD student from Italy at the University of Oxford, Wolfson College. She's mainly an epigrapher and an ancient historian who's working on a PhD, which is just about ready to be submitted on. So this summer will be the coronation of Alessandra. And this on religion and magic in the ancient world, mainly through the epigraphical sources. And today she's going to talk to us about the cartography of magic in the magical papyri. Alessandra.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer of this conference for giving me the opportunity to present a short version of one of my chapters of my doctoral thesis. And for my thesis project, my goal is to develop a special theory of magic, focusing on the materiality of magic, particularly cursed tablets from the Roman Empire between the 1st and the 5th century CE. And additionally combining this analysis with the investigation of space in both the literary sources of Latin literature, such as Horace, Lucan, Apuleius, and the Graeco-Egyptian magical papyri. So in this presentation, I will show the results of the spatial analysis about the magical papyri. And my objective here is to provide an overview of the places and spaces depicted in this text and to discuss their functions within the context of the rituals. As per the title I gave, my starting idea is that the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri taken as a whole construct a sort of like map of these private rituals, religious magical rituals. They list, for example, where to conduct these private rituals, where to find ingredients for the prescriptions. They list the cities or towns connected to particular deities or otherwise significant for such ritual prescriptions. So before delving into the text of the papyri, I want to provide some background on what the speciality or spatial theory means and briefly explain the spatial turn that has influenced classical studies. This concept of speciality serves as a heuristic model here, focusing on the interaction between individuals and religious magical places and spaces. Starting with terminology, I employ all the three terms from spatial analysis, meaning place, space, and landscape. Scholars of the spatial turn in both the humanities and social science typically choose two of them. Usually it's like place and space or place and landscape. However, I consider these three elements as the three steps of the same ladder of speciality. So on this ladder, the first step is symbolized by place, which embodies a pure visual, constructed, and tangible function. Following this, a place transitions into a space when it's imbued with semantic values and gains additional meaning. Consequently, while a place is engaged with through the senses and is thus tangible, spaces are conceived here as a perceived and experienced with the mind, making space the second step of the ladder. So to this end, space suggests a subjective viewpoint, particularly that of the agents who actively engage with and mold the place, Thus, place and space are two aspects of the same entity and should not be viewed as mere backdrops or settings for events, nor as empty vessels awaiting actions and movements, nor as entities to be dismissed as the dead, the fixed, the undialectical. So an example of this foundational perspective shared by both the social theorist Henri Lefebvre in his seminal work, The Production of Space, and this study is that every space must be perceived as a doing space, implying that is lived in and defined by both its allure and its zones of peril, thereby rendering it as far from neutral. Progressing to the concept of landscape, it's often the case that scholars equate what Lefebvre described as space with landscape. Conversely, some choose to eliminate the term entirely, relying solely on the two aforementioned constructs. In stark contrast, this analysis employs both terms, space and landscape, with different meanings and functions. So in defining landscape, I align with the notion proposed by Diana Spencer, who draws on sociologist Mark Auger's definition. So Spencer conceived of landscape as a collection of places and spaces where the cultural memory of a given community or society converges with their collective imagination to forge a shared communal worldview. This interpretation emphasizes the function of memory and imagination in crafting a collective visual understanding of the world. So in summary, with the scope of this research, the distinction between space and landscape lies in the fact that the former, so the space, is shaped by a limited group of individuals, namely the agents, whereas the latter is constructed by the shared mentality of a local community and or a broader society. Ultimately, the landscape emerges as their symbolic perception or representation of a series of places and spaces which share similarities, like the natural, the human, the imagined. So magical, Greco-Egyptian magical papyri. The magical papyri is a traditional term given to this body of papyri created with the context of a flourishing traditional of Greco-Egyptian private rituals used for purely pragmatic ends. All manuscripts have been recovered from Egypt. They range in date from the 1st century BCE to the 6th century CE, although the majority of these ritual prescriptions are thought to have been composed from the early 2nd to the 3rd century CE. As living texts, they were subjected to continual alteration, elaboration, and improvements. And they can be divided into two main groups. So formularies, a collection of ritual prescription that address an implied reader assumed to be capable of performing the ritual. And this group can be further divided into two subgroups. So the first subgroup includes compendious edition of prescription from different unspecified sources, most likely early formularies. And this group comprises various types of divination, instruction for obtaining dream visions, responses via child medium, personal vision of a god while awake, and more. And the second subgroup includes brief texts with only one or two prescriptions. And then the second group, individual activated texts, including binding and erotic curses, phylacteries, amulets. And these texts were produced by ritual specialists, but to address clients seeking supernatural assistance for health or interpersonal conflicts. Scholars suggest that these clients were relatively prosperous and enterprising Greek-speaking inhabitants of the metropolis of Lower and Middle Egypt. And both groups of texts are a product of a scribal class that created a new verbal and visual idiom of ritual power by freely mixing and adapting Egyptian, Greek, and Jewish ritualistic traditions. So the numerous manuscripts that constitute the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri are today conveniently accessible in 4 modern text corpora: the Papyri Graecae Magicae, PGM, the Greek magical papyri in translation, including the demotic spells, and the Supplementum Magicum, and last year the first volume of the two of a new edition of this text titled Graeco-Egyptian Magical Formularies was published, open access, replacing the PGM edition and serving as the main reference for this presentation. So therefore, by reading the papyri through a spatial lens, the first thing that emerges is that the temple sites are not mentioned as frequently as one would expect in the ritual prescriptions. Instead, as Khurshid also noted, the site where the ritual is to work is generally described in vague terms as place, topos, or house. And indeed, many texts mention the word oikos, house, such as Gem 31, dated to the second half of the 3rd century CE, which states, take the god into the small room where you live and sit him down, but first clean the room as is fitting. So oikos means room in this context, but it does not necessarily indicate a room in private houses. And it can also refer to a room in a temple compound. In this example, rooms must always be clean, purified before performing rites or uttering any prayer. And such purification is crucial, especially for receiving an apparition of a god, or for receiving the god into the body to obtain prediction and oracles. And purification is required not only for the practitioners, but also for anyone attending the room. So another peculiar characteristic is that the room is sometimes requested to be in complete darkness and oriented to the east, as in Gap 16, dated to the late 2nd century CE. And as you can see in when it says like preparation, it says you go to a dark room whose door opens to the south or is in a pure place. As with all ancient oracular experiences, both darkness and a secluded room recreate a near-death experience, facilitating contact with supernatural beings through sensory deprivation. The orientation to the east, where the sun rises, and the use of sand from the Nile create a connection with important Egyptian deities, such as the sun god Ra and Osiris, so in the mythological saga of Osiris and Isis. So not only must the place be purified before the ritual, but it also has to be untouched by previous human contact by using clean sand from the Nile. And sometimes new bricks or clean linen are placed upon the floor to ensure the space impeccability. And elaborated purification is also required for the practitioner's body and or soul before entering the dedicated ritual space and performing the ritual to achieve the actual goal of the spell. So real places are often mentioned in the papyri located in Egypt and outside, allowing us to draw a sort of religious map of the formularies. While few Greek places like Dodona are mentioned, there are several Egyptian cities with clear connection to Egyptian deities, such as Heliopolis, so the city where the sun god Ra has his temple, and Abydos, the burial site of Osiris. So, for example, in Gem 15, it's mentioned Abydos there. And the mention of such localities established a connection with the deity, but also create, in my opinion, a link with the surrounding reality, essential for making the narrative more realistic through its link to the surrounding world. The formularies, by mentioning such places, construct a sort of like sacred cartography. Another interesting aspect is the mention of object. Yes, the mention of objects, sorry, specifying usually books, but not only, specifying their provenance or location. For example, game 57, title Spell of Attraction, is ascribed to Pancratis, called the prophet of Heliopolis, but also game 3, dated between the 1st century BC and the earliest 1st century CE, mention a Syrian woman from Gadara, or ascribe the incantation for headache to Philinna of Thessaly. So some scholars have suggested that Philinna could be identified with the famous Hellenistic courtesan Philinna of Larissa, mother of Philip of Arrhidaeus, half-brother of Alexander the Great. However, there is no evidence for this, and others argue that these figures are fictional based on the literary commonplaces of magical association with, for example, Thessaly or Syria. And my focus here is on the motivation that led the scribe to specify the provenance of such practitioners. So perhaps it was the fact that coming from places like Heliopolis, or Thessaly, or Syria would lend the incantation greater legitimacy and prestige, thereby enhancing their perceived effectiveness. And furthermore, we can imagine a scenario where a client visits their local practitioner and requests similar charms, and the practitioner might say, I can provide you this charm originally crafted by Philinna of Thessaly. Thus, the religious spaces mentioned in the formularies might serve not only to authenticate the incantation, but also to evoke a sense of wonder in the client. To strengthen this point, we can recall that in Horus's Epod 5, the witch Canidia implicitly likes herself to Medea, since, as she states, she proudly casts spells using the same herbs as the great sorceress. And in this case, the fact that the spell comes from such an authoritative source suggests that the spell must be effective and work immediately. Indeed, when Canidia realizes that the spell was ineffective, she never questions the spell itself, but thinks that she is at fault for not following all the steps correctly. A similar scheme holds true for object, as I said before, especially books. I think also in Marina's presentation, we have the mention of books coming from temples. And these books are called hierai, so sacred, to emphasize the spatial status equivalent to coming from a temple. And for example, yes, Gem 4 says the one found in Heliopolis, the holy book roll called the Hermes book in the Sanctum, written in the Egyptian writing and translated into Greek. And PGM 7 says this papyrus itself, the personal property of the 12 gods, was found in Aphroditopolis, beside the greatest goddess Aphrodite Urania, who embraces this universe. So this repeated claim suggests that the text originally scribed in a temple or coming from a temple library was meant to increase, as I said, the book prestige. Proximity. A further feature of speciality in the rituals of the magical papyri is proximity. And this point was already raised by Svenja Nagel in one of the seminars of the Graeco-Egyptian seminar series regarding erotic spells. However, such proximities is not only used for erotic purpose, ritualized object, not only for erotic purposes. Ritualized objects like curse tablets often employ the same spatial logic as that used for amulets or phylacteries, which is the principle of physical proximity to the person, who in turn was meant to be protected in the case of amulets, or cursed in the case of curses. For example, the spell of Gem 15 says it's a separation spell, and says to write this spell on a nostracon and then recite it and then place it where so the target couple are where they usually return while at the same time uttering the formula. The ritualized object must be placed in setting frequented by the couple to be separated or at the entrance of their house. And usually in the magical papyri, the threshold is also a common place where a separation spells or curses are placed. In other lines of this same papyrus roll written in Demotic, the curse is prescribed to be buried under the door sill in the road before the house and in the above mentioned house. So although there might be no complete physical contact between the ritualized object and its victim, positioning a harming spell or curse in workspaces, homes, or other places frequented by the victim was considered close enough to exert a negative influence and harm both the victim and their environments. And this proximity using place as intermediary is also found in protective amulet, as I said, but also in curse tablets related to sport competition deposited in circuses and arenas, targeting charioteers to influence their performance, such as those from Carthage and Adrumentum, dated to the late Roman period. So in these cases where proximity applies, it's appropriate to talk of these spaces as taskscapes because the primary motivation was to achieve the closest proximity to the person. One might argue then that the presence of ritualized objects like curses or other ritualized objects in any of these contexts subtly altered how such settings were perceived and interacted with by both the actors involved like individuals or cursor and possible intermediaries and the respective communities revolving around these places. So as per the title of my presentation, by looking at the speciality of these like religious, magical, private rituals in this corpus of ritual prescription, I was primarily searching for the mention of sacred places, not as like just references. Rather, I aim to draw like a framework equivalent to an imaginary sacred map of georeligious spaces. However, the real places are mentioned scarcely and without much emphasis, except for Heliopolis and Abydos. Thus, real-world sites seem to cluster in these two main areas of Egypt. Instead, the landscape experienced by practitioners and possibly by their clients too is a new sacred space set indoors in private settings, such as rooms, houses, rooftops, or workshops rather than the temple spaces. And the creation of such new spaces involves purifying both the officiant, the potential clients, spectators, and most importantly, the place itself. So the shift from temples to private rooms correspond to a shift towards new form of like religious behaviors. And as Richard Gordon rightly argued, and I quote, the relative decline of the temples in the Roman period in these areas evidently forced priests to become more like the part-time, often itinerant practitioners outside the temple who lived from the lower grade magical and healing services they could sell to the clients. End of quote. As a result, this shift can be seen as a miniaturization of rituals, ritual paraphernalia, and do-it-yourself and individual action by the practitioner. The magnification of the other and on the other hand can be seen perhaps in the mentioning of the deities connected to real places or the epithets of the deities like Aphrodite Urania, who embraces this universe, and Ion, Lord of the universe. In concluding, it's important to recall here Jonathan Smith's concept of religion of anywhere, According to Smith, late antique form of Mediterranean religions are characterized by three spatial categories connected to rituals. The religion of here, so domestic religion, primarily in the home or burial sites, religion of there, so public or state religions largely based in the temples, and religion of anywhere, so religious formation occupying an in-between space. In Smith's terms, the religion of here has a prime space that is domestic, and its rituals are small scale, but the deities are those commonly associated with the religion of there. Conversely, temple rituals depend on the sacrality of the temple space, and people go there to perform the rituals. However, the religion of anywhere values direct experience of transcendent beings, both as demonstration of power and as a means of gaining esoteric knowledge, often creating their own sacred spaces for a divine contact. Agreeing with Smith's view that the rites of the Graeco-Egyptian magical papyri are an expression of theological knowledge ascribed to the religion of anywhere, I also see that the practices described in these texts are inherently rites in transit and utilizing multiple locations. The ritual might begin in a personal spaces, such as the home of the individual casting the curse or the professional workspace of a practitioner, and culminates in a different strategically chosen location for the invocation of or for the spell. These sites may be selected for their proximity to the intended victim or conversely for their distance, suggesting that the influence of religious magical prescriptions can extend from afar, potentially originating from the underworld. And the unfolding of these rituals often took place in the workspace of the specialized practitioner who served as intermediaries, reducing the client to mere spectators. Alternatively, these rituals may occur in complete secrecy and isolation, emphasizing that magic can manifest like anywhere and everywhere, yet remain unseen. Ultimately, the flexibility of locations, alongside the rhetorical intensification and more abstract theological knowledge, produced in the users of this ritual prescription and imaginary religious magical space, which we might suppose far exceeds the real and the textual spaces taken alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra. And thank you for that wonderful paper. I never realized that salted fish could be so dangerous. Well, I think we'll just open the floor for discussion. I've got a couple of questions myself, obviously, if things lag. But yeah, I'm inviting all of you and all of you to please contribute what you know. All right. Well, I wanted to ask first of all about this theme of darkness in the magical papyri.
Yes.
I mean, is there obviously, I suppose, well, you identify it with the underworld, with the chthonic kind of aspect of it, and that fits very well, I guess, into what we think of as the background to the Greek mysteries.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
in Eleusis, obviously, it's
Yeah.
the mystery takes place from what we can see in the guttering torchlight of the telesterion. So there's a sense of darkness, secretness, mystery, and sacredness. I mean, even the Greek word for night, alphrone, points in that direction, doesn't it? But I mean, what do we do we have something similar in the Egyptian tradition, or is there something specifically, because it struck me very interesting that the darkness seemed to be aligned with purification rather than with danger, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. When I read this papyri first, I was like, oh, it must be like it's like it repeats itself, like a lot of like dark rooms, and like it must be purified, must be in a dark room and oriented to east. So for sure it was connected to these religious practices. I'm not sure it's like Egyptian, like into like Egyptian, but for sure in this magical papyri have this kind of traditional together Egyptian, Greek, and also Jewish tradition. There might be the case that dark doesn't mean to be scared of, but it's actually something for purification and for raise the experience of meeting the gods, like these encounters with the gods. So definitely it's it might be related to the, for sure, to the meeting.
And when the papyrus speaks of bringing the god into the room, what they mean is bring your statuette of the god into the room and make him really comfortable.
Yes.
I guess astronomy normally mean clean in these texts, because I mean the first thing I think of is something like the Pulvinares of a Roman Roman feast of the gods. You know, like put down a nice blanket for the god Palladion.
No, definitely. It's a very interesting. Of course, like the oracles were always in darkness. If we think of the Greek oracles, were always like you know in darkness, and there was like yes, this experience in complete like sensory deprivation. So for sure, it's like a resemblance of that. But I was like surprised that it must be dark room, and also even though when it says like the sun, so it can be like in the morning, but the sun cannot enter the room. So that's this.
There's a question online actually. Anna Potamiti asks whether there's any evidence. There's no evidence of magic rituals being performed outdoors.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes, not the only when I was looking for this cartography of magic, I was like, oh, I expected so many places to be mentioned of in Egypt, but instead, like there were just these two like outdoor places, like real cities, like Heliopolis and Abydos, and all the other places were indoors, like in these rooms, and rooms also can be rooms of the temples, but as well, like must be dark, and then few people also attend the practitioner, and usually sometimes is a child that has to help the practitioner, because the child is of course like pure, or other people must be also purified. So this sense of cleanness, like impeccability of the place.
Marina.
Thank you so much for this very interesting lecture. This is a topic that is very dear to my heart. On the topic of darkness, it might be interesting to remark that from around this period, but the composition, of course, composition issues are complicated. So it probably dates to a lot earlier, but we have copies of a ritual in the so-called Book of Thoth. Book of Thoth is a modern designation, but according to Joachim Quack, the original title of this ritual was the Ritual for Entering the Chamber of Darkness. And this is an initiation text for the scribal office, which in the Greco-Roman period, it was something restricted to, especially the Roman period, to priestly scribes. There were very few people who would be instructed in the Egyptian scripts. And it is a dialogue between a master and a disciple. There's some discussion if the master is Thoth or is not. I'm not going to go into that. But it reminds us also a lot of what we see in the Hermetica. Now, this is meant to happen in this context of darkness, which obviously, if you think of an Egyptian temple, the inner sanctuary is always in darkness. And one of the features of the architecture of the temple is that the floor gets higher, the ceiling gets lower, and is this secluded space in which light, there are no windows, light doesn't enter. This is obviously a reference to that moment of creation. And if we think we're talking about Thoth, if we think of the creation myth in Hermopolis Magna, the city of Thoth, two of the beings that are involved in the creation are called darkness and feminine darkness. So darkness is this primordial feature. So I think that part of it is connected to trying to recreate this moment of creation in which there's no light because the sun hasn't been born yet. So we are in this watery space in complete darkness. It's recreating that moment in which also you have this purity because there's nothing impure created yet. So, but that's a very, very important point for recreating this space. And it might point also to the location of some of these rituals in that temple space that allows for that total darkness at any moment of the day, even during the day. So
essentially what you're trying to do then is create, I mean, it's like you can imagine a lovesick teenager trying to create the atmosphere of an Egyptian temple in his bedroom.
Well, one of the questions is about how much the temples. I've written about this, so this is one of my areas of contention because I actually don't agree that much with Jonathan Smith, and especially with Frankfurter and his interpretation of the practitioners as itinerant, at least until the 3rd century. I don't think that that interpretation is valid for 1st and 2nd century because the temples were still active and prosperous at the time. But for later on, that's when things become murky. And the question is, who is practicing all these rituals? Who has access to all these rituals? Who are the actual practitioners? And what do you need in order to become a practitioner? So, yeah. Complicated.
Thanks, Marina. Yeah, that's great. I have a question. That's actually several questions online, which I will try to translate for you. So yes, Maria asks, do the gods differentiate who are appealed to for negative spells? The Egyptians had demons where those types of spirits mentioned are specified as opposed to positive gods. So the question is, is there a specific term for the divine power that you invoke negatively, let's say in a curse, as opposed, or in a love spell, let's say, as opposed to a to the negative power, or rather to the positive powers that you invoke. I don't know, yeah.
No, I don't think so.
healing
I
powers,
mean,
for
I don't think so.
well, certainly that's not true of the Greek.
No, what I've read, like the gods are over like revered, and they're always, you know, called like, oh Lord God, like with all these epithets of emphasizing their power. And to my knowledge, there is no difference between like let's say a negative spell and a positive, like a protective spell. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask actually one more thing, relating to our friend Filina Thessaly. Now, for me, obviously, as somebody who's read some Greek literature, Thessaly is the place of witches. You know, the women who go out in the night and call down the moon, whatever that means, and you know, as Apuleius tells us. So you know, you can imagine Thessaly being a kind of natural location for the and then you know, whether in an oral tradition or in the kind of pragmatic written tradition that we've been talking about, where people are constantly appealing to older sources. I mean, one of the things that immediately sprang to mind when you talked about, as Marina did, about this tendency to ascribe whatever sacred knowledge you're trying to foist on the world with origins in the distant past, is the story about the early Greek mythographer Pousilaos of Argos, who claimed to have discovered a pile of bronze tablets in his father's kitchen garden, which contained the truth about the origins of the universe. You know, it's like Joseph Smith and the origins of Mormonism. But I was wondering, you know, in connection with the you mentioned Abydos and Heliopolis as the places which constantly recur in the imaginaire of the magical papyri, and I was wondering whether there's association. Are these simply very sacred places? Are they like the Rome and and Constantinople of the Egyptian world, or is there something more that would connect them to magic?
I don't think so. Like the mention of these places is just like plan. It's like Abydos and Heliopolis, or the sacred place in Heliopolis, but they don't say much about this real place. It don't describe it. Of course, these are formularies. It's not a narrative. It's not a. They're not like proper like literary sources as Apuleius, so we don't have a description of the place. I think it's just a connection to see to revere the god, to actually, you know, invoke the god and evoke the god. But rather than that, it's just the citation of the real place. And of course, I mean, I was surprised also to see, I mean, Thessaly is a very well-known place for magic. So it's interesting to see this, like, again, this tradition all adapt together between Greeks and Jewish and Egyptian. So I found it very interesting, and also found interesting that they mentioned this like female practitioner, the woman from Gadara and Philina of Thessaly. So they weren't just priests, like they weren't just these priest practitioners like Pancratis, but they were also women practitioners.
Yeah, that's important, isn't it?
I mean, it's very important, because otherwise we have only in the literary tradition. So only in the literary sources are all, especially in the Latin literary source, but also in the Greek, they're all female practitioners. There are very few male practitioners, and also they are called witches.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Andy here online as well.
I don't know much about Mexican texts, basically nothing, but Abydos is quite important in the history and culture. And I'm working on my work with demotic communicators, and the formula that you just mentioned, that we should serve the souls of,
So the formula that you mentioned, that you should serve the souls of Abydos, this is almost 100% identical with the formula that they use, the mummy labels. And it's an abbreviated version of the Book of Breathing. So this is a kind of short funerary formula. Basically, they wished that the soul should serve Osiris, the Lord of Abydos, so it should be with Osiris. So I would think that's why the reference to Abydos appears here.
Yes, and I suppose I mean, the funerary reference would sort of fit, I suppose, very much into what Greek culture thinks about, or doesn't think very much about about the priorities of Egyptian religion, right? Yeah. A bit like putting a curse tablet in the or taking a bit of a gladiator or something, or putting a curse tablet into a grave to make it powerful.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, we have a question from Andy Hale online. Andy, would you like to speak? Okay, well, we'll come back to you. Yes, do we have anyone?
Hello?
Oh, sorry. Hello,
Can you-
hello. We hear you.
Yeah, firstly, thank you for such a fantastic talk. And I just wondered if you agree with Christina Williamson in her chapter in Sacred Thresholds about the idea of within the temple itself, that rituals took place within shadow and light. Did you hear that?
Yes. So
Take place.
it take place within shadow and light. So about what we were just talking
So
about. Yeah.
rather than actually go into the temple, you know, rituals were performed, according to Christina, actually within the temple environment, but within spaces of shadow and light.
Yes, I think that.
Yes, I heard that. Yes, we were basically saying before about this incomplete darkness in the secluded space of the inner sanctum. So what strikes me is like this exactly again, this complete darkness and this between the shadow and light, in the sense that, as we were saying, the ritual can be performed also during the morning, so it doesn't have to be in the night. I mean, some formulary says with the full moon, so of course that darkness is the nighttime, but
of course, the full moon is a completely different kind of light, isn't it? I mean, it's so bright.
Exactly.
I don't know if you
Exactly.
so rarely see it now, like the
Absolutely,
ancients,
that's
so-
actually a good point. Yes.
So would you say that this then sort of like equates to a goddess like Hecate, who is a liminal goddess? So you've got spaces of liminality.
Yeah. I'm not sure I understand, but I understand the question, but I suppose the idea of moving from light into darkness, or darkness and light, does constitute a kind of liminal transformative situation for the people involved in the ritual. That makes perfect sense to me.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, also what we were saying about Abydos, I mean,
Yeah.
the deceased, the funerary context is
Yeah.
like, to me, it can be in complete darkness. So another reference to darkness. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, do we have it? Yes. From Chen Sirin, I think in Los Angeles. In your research, how important is location in the building of temples in relation to astronomy and astrology? And do you have any rituals regarding the goddess Sheshat? Goddess of scribes, architecture and measurement. That's what.
Not really. I mean, my investigation for this chapter is I was looking for the spaces and places in the like in the magical papyri as a reference to actually real places, rooms, or any other kind of reference, like to the gods of the underworld, and not to like connect it to the astrological or astronomical knowledge per se. So yes, it was a general overview of the spaces and places. Yes.
Yes. And thank you for the question. Very useful. So do we have any other questions from people in the room, or points that you want to make? Pat? No? Okay. Well, why don't we thank Alessandra then once
Thank
again
you.
for a lovely paper. And I learned a lot from it. And so now we're basically going to have a lunch break,